Good morning. Great to be with you. It is morning here. It's slightly foggy, but the sun's going to come out. They promise. Yes, they promise. This is a great lesson that I've been looking forward to for a long time. Been studying chapter 12 almost from the beginning of this semester, just preparing myself for this lesson, even though it was months away, because it was really, it has become a highlight in my life. It has changed my thinking on suffering. And that's what this Bible study is about. Why do Christians suffer? What is the purpose for suffering? It's wonderful to know that there is a purpose for suffering, for the world does not have a purpose for suffering, but we do. And so the writer of Hebrews is going to explain two purposes for suffering. I'm sure there are others, but he's going to narrow down two purposes for suffering. And we've just finished chapter 11, months, a whole semester given over to chapter 11, and maybe even more than that, but the faith chapter. And we've learned that that faith, enduring faith, faith that endures, is what these saints of the Old Testament display to us. And so our author is now going to talk about us. He's already talked about them and the people of the Old Testament. And not everybody, but many of the faithful people he has used as examples. But now we come to us. What do we do? Why do we suffer? And that's, we're going to start with endure suffering as an athlete in training. That's what the first four verses of chapter 12 are going to be about. We're going to circle the word endure because it's going to be used repeatedly. In Greek and Roman life, their lives revolved around two important elements: the family and sporting events. So that's what he's going to use in these first, 13 verses to give to us an explanation of why we go through suffering. He's going to use the family and he's going to use sporting events. In fact, it's going to be the reverse. First, it's going to be sporting events. Then it will be the family. So we're going to read through verses 1 to 4 before we tackle it. Because most of you haven't read it, the chapter ahead of time. And so you need to have a familiar feel for those verses that we're going to deal with. So let's just read it with you circling the word endure. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Okay, endurance. Endure like an athlete. Um, we we're going to first enter the world of the sporting events in the Colosseum. In both Greek and Roman thinking, sporting events was just like sporting events today in America, only I think more so. And therefore, it says in verse 1 of chapter 12, therefore, um, he's talking about the previous chapter. Therefore, therefore what? Therefore, since all these former saints had enduring faith through suffering, therefore, uh, we are surrounded since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Now, I used to think, before I read it in context, that there was this great cloud of witnesses who were sitting like in an arena watching us as we faithfully went along in our lives. But that's not what he's talking about when he talks about the witnesses. This is a crowd of witnesses, not spectators watching us. They are witnesses to us through their lives that they endured suffering by faith. So they are witnesses to us of enduring faith. They talk to us. They encourage us to endure as they did. So then, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, cloud is like a metaphor for a host or an army of witnesses. These witnesses who came before us, they went through suffering also, and so we're not alone. They 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 suffered too, and we suffer today. Let's see what it says about these witnesses. Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses who witness to us of their faith, let us lay aside every weight, that's one, and let us lay aside every sin, that's two, which clings so closely, and three, and let us run with endurance. There's our endure word. We are to run like the racer in the Colosseum. This is a racer who ran a foot race, not a race of speed, but a race of endurance. Not a sprint, but a marathon. Now, there's this woman that I read about. I think her name was Jacqueline, but I remember seeing pictures of her. She had had a child the year before, and she had learned to pace herself in this marathon. And so as she was running, she got a certain speed and a certain, momentum, and she did not want to stop. Now, the thing is that you probably don't know about, because they don't always show you, that there were porta potties along the way, so that if the runner needed to, they could stop there. But she knew that if she stopped, she would lose time, number one, and lose the pace that she was on. So this girl, female runner in a marathon, needed to stop, but she did not. And so I looked it up to see if the news on YouTube had anything on her, and they did. Even though it was years and years ago that this happened, they had her story. In the story mentioned, it was entitled "The Female Racer Who Pooped in Her Pants." I that was that's exactly what it was called. And so what she did was keep on running and not stopping. And so even as she got to the close to the end line where her friends were cheering her on, she cried out, "I pooped my pants." And she didn't stop. She kept on running. She kept on, and I was thinking, gee, that's exactly what we need to do. Not stop. Keep on running the race set before us as those who endure pain, even though if we stopped, it would alleviate that pain, but it would stop our momentum in our race as enduring saints. So, and let us run with endurance, it says, the race set before us. We are to endure and race like the people in chapter 11 endured and ran a race. They are the witnesses who surround us. And then how? How are we to endure? How do I endure when suffering is so hard to bear? It says, looking to Jesus. As a runner concentrates on the finish line, we are to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. And then it goes on to say, the founder and perfecter of our faith. Jesus initiates the faith and he completes the faith of the believer. Jesus was the trailblazer who went before us, the one who was going to endure even through suffering. So, who, for the joy that was set before him, now watch, here's the second time endure is used, endured the cross. We are changed. We endure because Jesus endured the cross. So we are now changing from the racer to Jesus. He endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated on the right hand of the throne of God. So we get the answer to what was the joy that was set before Jesus, that he kept his eyes on the finish line. And that was that when it was all over, he would sit at the right hand of the throne of God. Then it says in verse 3, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. You see, he had to endure, just as the racer has to endure. He had to endure two things. It tells us he endured the cross, and it tells us that he endured from sinners such hostility against himself. The cross and hostility were the things that Jesus had to endure. And then it goes on to say this. Well, start with verse 3 again. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. You see, consider him. The author is telling us to meditate on Jesus and what he endured. What did he endure? the cross and hostility. We are to consider and meditate on this Jesus who endured even through the suffering he had to face. Then it says, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Verse 4, in your struggle against sin, you have not resisted to the point of shedding your blood like Jesus had. He's telling the people, you haven't gotten it as bad as Jesus had. You haven't endured to the point of shedding your blood. So what is our author saying? He's saying, why do Christians suffer? To learn endurance as Christ endured. There's a purpose for suffering. The non-Christian sufferers have no purpose, but we have a purpose. We endure as Christ endured. Then on the next thing, endure suffering as a son. Remember, I had told you that Greek and Roman thinking highlighted sporting events and the family. And so now he's going to go to the family. Suffering, endure suffering as a son who's being instructed. There is purpose in our suffering. I'm going to repeat that over and over again. There is a purpose for our suffering. God uses suffering now in this next section to train, instruct, educate us as his children. Verse 5. Let me read the verse from verse 5 to 11 through, and then we'll tackle each verse. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? And he's quoting from Proverbs. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline, the training, the instruction, the education of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him, for the Lord disciplines, trains, instructs, educates the ones he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. This discipline is not punitive. It is not a punishment. Suffering is not a punishment. It is training. It is instruction by a loving Father. It is educative. Now, I looked up the word that's translated discipline, and it's paideo. And I want to show you that in every case in the New Testament, when that word is used, it's not punitive. It's instruction. It's training. So go to Acts with me, please. Acts chapter 7 and verse 22. Acts chapter 7 and verse 22. Let's look what it says in verse 22. And Moses was instructed, that's paideo, in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deed. He was instructed, he was educated, not punished, instructed, educated, trained in the wisdom of the Egyptians. Let's go to another one in Acts 22, so that we can see what the author is talking about. And we can see that he's not talking about, corporal punishment by God, giving us suffering to punish us. We have Acts 22, verse 3. I am a Jew, says Paul, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated It's paidiu. Educated at the feet of Gamaliel, according to the strict manner of the law. Paul was paidiu. He was instructed. He was educated by Gamaliel. And then 2 Timothy. Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. Timothy, 2 Timothy 3:16. 2 Timothy 3:16. And 3:16 says this: all scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. How does God educate, instruct? Through the Word of God. And that instruction, that training is paidiu. And so when the Lord disciplines, trains the one he loves, it is for instruction, for training, for education. It's not punitive. And it says this: it is for discipline, training, instruction that you have to endure. Notice I keep on repeating the same words because when you look at it, I want you to remember it means training, education, instruction. It is for discipline, training, instruction that you have to endure. Endure what? Suffering, because that's what this is all about. God is treating you as sons. All who belong to God are disciplined. For what son is there? Wait a second. It is God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline, train, instruct? If you are left without discipline, training, instruction, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children. All who belong to God are disciplined. If it is withheld, it indicates that you are illegitimate. The Father exerts instruction on everyone who's in his family. Okay, let's start again with verse 8. If you are left without discipline, training, instruction, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. How did they discipline us? According to their limited wisdom. But shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? And later in chapter 13, we'll find out that spirits means those of us who are believers. For they disciplined, trained, instructed us for a short time, as it seems best to them. But he disciplines, trains, instructs us for our good, that we may share his holiness. How are we instructed? Trained through suffering. The purpose of suffering is to be trained, instructed in holiness. So the author gives us two purposes for suffering. To learn endurance as Christ endured, as he learned endurance, and two, to be trained as a child of God. Let's go back to verse 11. For the moment, all discipline, training, instruction seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. The author acknowledges that discipline is distasteful, bringing grief rather than joy. However, it has an end result that makes the painful training worthwhile. What's that result? The peaceful fruit of righteousness, a righteousness that is pleasing and satisfying. Remember what it was said of Moses a couple chapters ago, the last chapter. He rejected present pleasures and chose to suffer with the people of God to obtain a future reward. Remember that? So why do we go through suffering? According to verses 1 to 4, to learn as an athlete to endure as Christ endured. And verses 5 to 11, to learn as a child trained by his father to endure for a future reward. When confronted by suffering, I am learning to ask, what do you want me to learn from this suffering? Because we all suffer. And if we suffer and are grieved and do not learn from it, it's wasted. It's wasted time. I want to have a purpose for my suffering. I want to know what that purpose is. And that purpose is so that we endure like Christ endured. And that we endure as a son who is chastised, trained, instructed by my Heavenly Father. Okay. The next page is that, okay, here we go. Okay. We have, so, the suffering of the past of these believers that the author is writing to, the suffering of the present, and the suffering, the perceived suffering of the future, because they're thinking they're going to suffer again, have made these Jewish Christians want to escape back to their old Jewish religion. They've suffered in the past persecution. The author has commended them on their ability to suffer. And they're suffering right now, and they perceive future persecution, and they're becoming afraid. And it would be much easier just to go back to their old religion, where they hadn't suffered. Did you ever notice that since you become a Christian, that there's been suffering? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we're being trained by the Lord. And so they want to go back to the old religion. And so that's what the book of Hebrews has been about. Why would you want to go back to the old covenant when you have what you have now in the new covenant? And so he's going to give another argument comparing, contrasting, of being under the old covenant and now being under the new covenant. So it says this on the left-hand side. For you have not come to what may be touched. Now what he gives a list. A blazing fire, and darkness, and gloom, and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and a voice whose words have made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. Now, this is a list, a description of what happened when the Old Covenant was inaugurated in Exodus. The author of Hebrews is describing what it was. He lumps one thing over the other with the ands. The Old Covenant was terrifying. It had boundaries with terrifying judgment. Free access to God was denied. He piles up descriptions of terror. Why would you want that? He's saying. Let's go on. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. You couldn't touch Mount Sinai when he was given the covenant. You could not go near it. Even a beast or a person who touched it would die. No one could come near to God. No one could come to where God was. And so it says in verse 21, indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. The main point is that the people could not draw near to God through Sinai. The Old Covenant was entirely inadequate. Now, he's going to tell us the contrast, the New Covenant. That's at Mount Zion and the New Covenant. And it says in verse 22, but you have come. Remember the other ones? You have not come. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God. You've gone right up to the New Jerusalem. You have access to God in the New Covenant, which is beautiful, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn. We'll go back to it after I read it, who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. I'm going to skip the bottom for now, but let's go back. Notice he makes a list, and they're connected by and, just as he made a list under the Old Covenant that's connected by ands. A blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice. Just piling up these descriptions of terror. And now he talks about the New Covenant. And let's see, we have come to first Mount Zion and to the city of the living God. That's the New Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festive gathering. There's a feast. Not only do we get to go up Mount Zion without worrying about touching it or no free access to God, we have free access to God. And when we go up, there's innumerable angels in festivity. Verse 23, and to the assembly of the firstborn. Who are they? Us. So we're an assembly of firstborn. We're called the firstborn, who are enrolled in heaven. That is, we have free access because we are citizens of heaven. And to God, the judge of all. See, we have free access to Judge Yahweh, and to the spirits of righteous. Here's the spirits again. That's us, the righteous made perfect. We are not righteous or perfect because of ourselves. We are made righteous. That's righteous. We are made perfect. Um, then it says in 24, and to Jesus. So we have free access to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, it says in 24. And to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. Now, just as the old covenant had to be inaugurated through blood, so the new covenant had to be inaugurated by the sprinkled blood of Jesus. And it says, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Okay, do you remember the story of Cain and Abel? Do you remember that there were no speaking parts for Abel? He never spoke one word. But what does the author say? That he speaks a better word. God speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. It was the blood of Abel that cried out to Yahweh. You remember that? Abel never speaks, but his blood does. What does Abel's blood call for? Judgment upon the sinner. Judgment upon Cain. But the sprinkled blood that belongs to Jesus cries out and calls for grace to all who believe. Look at the difference. He's saying, why would you want to go back to that? Particularly the fact that we couldn't come near to God. But now we have free access through the sprinkled blood of Jesus Christ that speaks a better word than Abel's, whose word was judgment. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at Exodus 19 and Hebrews 12, because I want you to go back and see compare in your mind how it's described by the author and how Moses describes the situation. The author has done a great thing by summarizing what was in Exodus 19 and 24. So I'm going to read it. And Yahweh said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. Now, great things, I'm going to stop here because this is great. The great things always happen on the third day. They prepare us for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which happened on the third day. So I want to emphasize that here is one of those third day incidents that are so important in the Old Testament because they prepare us for the third day resurrection. For on the third day, Yahweh will bring down on Mount Sinai will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. They'll be able to see something, not touch, but see something on Mount Sinai. And you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. See, it was terror. Don't touch it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. So you could not get near to God. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot, whether beast or man, he shall not live. Of course, this brought terror to the people. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people. And they washed their garments, just as God had said. And Moses said to the people, be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman. Now, the first time I read that, long time ago, I said, Is God saying that there's something impure or unholy about the sexual act? That he should say, don't go near a woman? No. It wasn't for years that question finally was answered by the context, by some of the law. You see, in the Old Testament times, in Moses' day, the worship of gods entailed, sex. There were male and female prostitutes in the temples of the surrounding nation. You remember, that's exactly what God wanted them to be free of. Why he wanted the Canaanites out of the land, because the Canaanites did this kind of worship. Well, now God is saying, I want you to know that when you come to me, when you worship me, no sex, no, that cannot be incorporated with these male and female prostitutes. You do not touch a woman in order to worship me. So then he says, on the mountain of the third day, on the morning of the third day, here we have the third. Did you notice third day, third day, third day? There were thunders and lightnings. Now here we have the description that the author of Hebrews is referring to. And there were thunders and lightnings and thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Remember, Moses trembled too. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. They just stood there. They didn't get close, nothing. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because Yahweh had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a furnace or kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. You remember this when we studied about storm theophanies. It's a fearful thing. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in the thunder. And Yahweh came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and Yahweh called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Now, several chapters later, after the giving of various laws, we come back, because Moses now, in chapter 24, is going to, the people are going to make a covenant with God. Moses came and told the people, verse 3 of 24, all the words of Yahweh and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that Yahweh has spoken, we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of Yahweh. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. Notice, it's always the foot of the mountain, not going up the mountain. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. So we have blood being sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that Yahweh has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. That's twice they say it. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it or threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant that Yahweh has made with you in accordance with all these words. So this is the chapter that the author of Hebrews is using when he describes the old covenant. And you can see that they weren't allowed to go near to God. And there also had to be in the old covenant the sprinkling of blood. In the new covenant, you can come near to God on Mount Zion, right? In the New Jerusalem. And there's the sprinkling of Jesus's blood. Remember that? And he is the one, he uses his own blood to make the new covenant. So let me just read what chapter 12 says again. For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice, whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal or festive gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Wow! Why would you give this up and go back? That's what the author is saying. It's crazy to go back to that. You don't want to go back to the old covenant where there was no access to God. We have access in the new covenant. We can go right up Mount Zion. Okay. Chapter 13, we're not going to do a lot with it. What I want to do is to show you how to read it. And you learn how to read it by looking at a repeated word that we're going to see. I wonder if you can get it. It's a very short word. So I'll give you that as your clue. So go to the last pages, and we're on chapter 13, verse 1. And it says this: Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. Why? For thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Let's go down to verse 4. Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. Why? For God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterer. Verse 5. Keep your life free from love of money, and be content with what you have. Why? For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, from those three portions, can you figure out the word that I want to emphasize throughout the rest of the chapter? If you guessed the word for, you would be right, because this gives us a reason why he's giving the exhortations. This is a chapter filled with exhortations or encouragement to do what is right. And so he uses the word for, because we've asked, why do I have to do that? And he says, because of this. So let's keep going. I'm not going to do every one. Let's go to verse 9. Do not be led away by diverse and strange teachings. Why? For it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by foods. It seems like these strange teachings said, you'll be strengthened and get more out of life if you only eat these certain foods or those certain foods in your religious practice. Now, this was not for health. This was for religious practice. So those of you who eat a certain way in order to be healthy, you're doing fine. You're not doing it for religion. You're not doing it so that God will be pleased with you, uh, as though God endorses a certain way of eating, as these religious practices exhorted them to do. He says, "For it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace and not by foods, which have not benefited those who devoted to them." Go down to verse 13. "Therefore, let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. Why? For here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city to come," just like we read about, the heavenly Jerusalem on Mount Zion, that city. Verse 16, "Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have." Why? "For such sacrifices," the sacrifice of doing good and sharing, "for such sacrifices are pleasing to God." Verse 17, "Obey your leaders and submit to them." Why? "For they are keeping watch over your souls, as those who will have to give an account." They're going to have to give an account. God's going to judge what they do. So let them do this with joy. Don't keep coming up to your pastor to complain. For that would be, and it says, let them do this with joy and not with groaning. I can see the pastor groaning within when we come up and have, a complaint about what he has preached on or what he's doing in the church, and as though we have come on, guys, give them compliments. For the complaining, for that would be of no advantage to you. Notice in verse 18, "Pray for us, for we are sure that we have a clear conscience, desiring to act honorably in all things." So we need to pray for them, our leaders. And then last of all, which I think is quite funny, it says, "I appeal to you, brothers, bear with my word of exhortation." That's this book that we just read. "For I have written to you briefly." I don't think so. There's been 13 chapters. And when we look back at the time period when this book was written, this letter was written, letters usually only were a half a page, and normally not much more than a page, perhaps a page and a half. This was 13 chapters, and not short chapters. But he says, "I appeal to you, brothers, bear with my word of exhortation, for I have written to you briefly." Okay, so we're going to close with that. And I am very happy that I have been with you this semester. Now, this semester is ended. We have just finished chapter 13, and I have enjoyed myself immensely. We are going to come back in the fall after the summer, and I'm going to be studying all summer long. Guess what book? The Gospel of John. And I'll be ready for you in September, God willing, because I love teaching you. And why don't you pray that we can get back together again in my home? I love these videos. I love doing them, and I will continue to do them. But I know you are looking forward to the time when we can get together in my home. Okay, so let me see. Well,